Hi, how are you? Let's just take a deep breath together. This is such an interesting and challenging time for most people. Let's do that again. Let's just take a nice deep breath together. One of the things that we tend to do when there's a lot of stress around us or within us is hold our breath. So taking a moment to make sure that you're breathing every once in a while, like literally making sure that you're breathing and that you're not holding your breath automatically, can really be quite helpful. So I would encourage you to do that every once in a while. I wanted to come in and talk to you today about something that I've been hearing quite a bit about for the last maybe month or so. I don't really remember. Time is such a weird thing right now. But with all of this going on and really across the globe, we are all dealing with something that is very unexpected, at least for most of us, and very unusual, something we've never experienced in our lifetimes. And with that brings up a lot. And so one of the things that I saw a while ago, and I'm seeing it kind of talked about in the same way since then, is that, I don't remember what the name of the article was, but something along the lines of what we're experiencing is grief. And I saw the man that wrote that post or that article on something. I saw a brief part of his interview, and I thought it was interesting, and I don't necessarily disagree with what he was talking about, basically saying that we are all experiencing grief. So the emotional discomfort, distress, struggle that we're experiencing is about grief, and not necessarily the kind of grief that we tend to think about with grief in terms of loss of a loved one, though obviously for a lot of people that is the case. But he was referring more to that we're all experiencing a sense of grief because of a loss of normalcy, a loss of our normal lives. And again, I don't necessarily disagree with that at all. That is a reality. It's a change, and change forced upon us is uncomfortable. And there is loss. There's loss of our social interaction. There's loss of routine, fear and loss around losing somebody that you care about, or maybe even your own illness or death. So grief is certainly something that probably a lot of people are experiencing without a doubt. But for so many people, and not just people who follow my channel, but people across the globe, for so many people, it's not quite that simple. Because even if you think about just grief, if you're experiencing grief around those things that I just mentioned that he talked about, most of us have some unresolved grief within us. Whether it's how we coped with the loss of somebody that we loved, whether it was last year or 40 years ago. But there's a lot of other types of grief and loss that we experience in life. So even if what you're experiencing is grief around something current, that is going to reconnect you to grief that has been unprocessed. So if you've been holding on to grief around something, loss, a feeling, an experience of loss that you have not really been able to process, then what you're feeling isn't just grief around loss of your normal life. you're also feeling the intensity, the added layers of grief that you have yet to process and heal. And when it comes to childhood trauma survivors, or even children who just grew up in a difficult, challenging, chaotic, abusive, I said just, but I'm taking it a little bit further now, but just other types of childhood difficulty beyond trauma. There's going to be a lot of that is present. You're going to be feeling the impact of those multiple layers of grief and loss. If you are somebody who has experienced childhood trauma in the form of abuse, particularly sexual abuse, but really any type of abuse, this is far beyond grief. What you are, if you have not yet healed, and the reality is that most people who have experienced childhood trauma have not done the deep, prolonged work of truly healing. You may have done pieces here and there. There may be some things that you have done really well at kind of working through. But healing has multiple layers. So for the majority of people out there, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody that you know, maybe it's somebody that you know or care about that you don't even know that they have childhood trauma. But for those who do, this is far beyond grief. Though grief may be a significant part of it, but for those that have experienced childhood trauma, the reality is that all of this feels very familiar. Yes, the circumstances are very different. Very different than what you grew up with, what you experienced. But what it creates for us on an emotional level, really for all of us to some degree or another, but for those that have a history of childhood trauma, this feels very familiar in many ways. And when you have that unhealed wounding that is there, so this applies to people that don't necessarily have childhood trauma as well, but when you have wounds that have yet to heal, and then you experience something in your current life that is incredibly impactful, there's a lot of familiar feelings that are present. So what you're experiencing, maybe the intensity of emotion or the intensity of the shutdown and pulling away and denying of what is real for you in this moment, that is because of how familiar it feels. So one of the things that has been coming up with people that I interact with a lot is that it feels like a remembrance of being completely powerless. For childhood trauma survivors, you were incredibly powerless. Not only in regards to the abuse that you might have been experiencing, but you had no power to change anything in your environment. You couldn't just decide to leave. Rules were dictated by somebody else. You couldn't stop not only what had already happened, but what was still likely going to continue to happen. So you experience an extreme level of feeling powerless. And right now, in many ways, we are once again feeling powerless. We don't have the ability to choose some of the things that we might want to choose. Now, technically, we might be able to just go out and do a lot of the things that we want to do, but for most of us, or I think for most of us anyway, I don't know the circumstances all over the world, but we don't have the ability to just come and go as we'd like. We don't have the ability to go to work or not go to work, generally speaking. If you are somebody who works at a grocery store or in the medical field or providing the services that we've taken for granted for so long, you don't necessarily have that much of a choice in going to work. Yes, you technically do, but you are expected still to go to work. Just like as a child, you were expected to do certain things no matter how you felt, no matter how much you were struggling emotionally or physically. For most of us, we are told that we have to stay home, that we have to work from home. Our children can't go to school. We have to do our best to stay away, to wear masks. And yes, there are good reasons for all of that, but that doesn't change that it is somewhat enforced upon us. And that can feel, when there are unhealed wounds, that can feel in our system very familiar. And so it can be a reminder. It can bring up the similar type of feeling of having no control. What's going on around us? Being made to stay home or told to stay home can leave us with a familiar feeling of being trapped, of having no escape. Not being able to get on a plane. And there are some people who were traveling and literally can't get back home. But that sense of feeling that we can't leave, that we can't go visit people, can feel familiar and make us feel that we are trapped and that we have no escape. It can reinforce the sense of feeling so incredibly alone in the world. As a child, there were likely people living in your home, whether it was just one person, whether that person was your abuser or not, or multiple people living in your home. But when you are abused as a child, one of the long-term ways that we're impacted is that we became so accustomed to feeling so incredibly alone in the world. And if you are staying at home, whether there are people around or not, it can feel very familiar. You can feel that you really are alone in the world. So it's a reminder in our body of what that feels like, to feel that nobody is aware, nobody is there to help, that we have to do this all on our own. Fortunately now, that is not the reality. But if there's unhealed stuff there and it feels familiar, you're likely going to go back into doing the same things that you did as a child to cope with it. You're likely going to pull back from people. You're likely saying things to yourself to reinforce an idea that you should be able to deal with it on your own, that you shouldn't be upset, that you shouldn't feel the way that you do. And so therefore you pull back from people. You stop messaging. You stop doing video chats. You make yourself believe that other people don't want to hear that you're struggling. That because you are struggling, that you really shouldn't show up with other people because you're going to bring them down. Or fearing that they may judge you because you're struggling. A feeling of hopelessness might feel familiar. As children, we often feel hopeless as if we're experiencing abuse or difficulties in our lives. We feel hopeless about what our future is going to look like. We fear and assume that it's just going to be more of the same, that things will never really be okay. And if at this time you're hearing or thinking that things are going to be drastically different, that you'll never be able to catch up, that all these relationships, or maybe just these one or two relationships that you've had, are never going to be the same. That sense of hopelessness connects to that hopelessness that has yet to heal, and it feels even bigger. That hopelessness that your life, that you will ever really be okay, can feel a lot stronger right now. And it's important to be able to recognize what it is that's really going on. Because if you just chalk this up to the same kind of grief that everybody's experiencing, the grief around the loss of our normal lives, then what you're focusing on to try to feel better is completely missing the mark. And when you don't feel better, it's reinforcing that there's something wrong with you. That you're not doing it right because you should feel better, because this is what you're supposed to do for grief around losing our normal lives. And of course, that isn't going to resolve or heal anything, because you're not getting at what the real emotions, what the real issue, what the bigger wound is. So it's important to recognize, to really honor the truth of what's going on for you. That it might feel kind of scary, that yes, we are all in this together, but what we as individuals, and this is true for everybody, what we as individuals are experiencing isn't necessarily the same thing our friend is experiencing or our partner is experiencing. What I'm experiencing as a therapist mentor in this time is very different than what most therapists are experiencing right now. I've been doing my work online for some time. I'm used to working from home. I'm used to being a homebody. I like being at home. I don't have a huge social life outside of being home. But for a lot of my therapist colleagues, they're used to going to an office every day. They're used to seeing people in person. They're used to maybe working in a setting where they have a lot of other people that they're working with, or at least a handful of other people. They're not used to seeing clients online, which is different. in a few really important ways. And so they are adjusting, and it's not an easy adjustment. So while we're doing some of the same work in some ways, what it is like for me in this time is very different than what it's like for some of them in this time. So even when we are maybe experiencing some of the same things, and globally there is a lot of solidarity in what we're experiencing, for each individual person, it can go a whole lot deeper. It can run in so many different ways, down different paths. And it is incredibly important for each of us to honor what this means for us, to not dismiss whatever it is we might be feeling, because while we're all going through it, it doesn't matter that we're all going through it in terms of what you're experiencing in a given moment. Take some comfort in recognizing that yes, we're all going through something. We're all experiencing some of the same things. But don't allow that to deny or minimize or rationalize something that you might be feeling that others aren't. Maybe you're feeling it a lot more than some others are. Maybe it's creating a lot more struggle for you than it is for other people. One of the things that I'm hearing people say is, well, I shouldn't feel lonely because I've got my partner and my kids, or I live with roommates or whatever. No. If you're feeling lonely, then you feel lonely, and there are reasons that you feel lonely. And some of them may be what I've said. Maybe there's other reasons. It doesn't matter. Don't discount or diminish what you're feeling because you think you shouldn't be feeling it. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting like feel it and get stuck there. Honor it. Have self-compassion. Don't say that you shouldn't be feeling what you're feeling. Don't talk yourself out of it because you think that other people have it worse. Because that is minimizing. And now, at this time, not all time I suppose, but especially at this time when we literally don't have a control over some of the things in our lives, now we really need to be very conscious of being honoring and self-compassionate with whatever we're feeling, however we're struggling, whatever that looks like. So take a moment now, maybe hit pause. Take a moment and ask yourself, have you been telling yourself that you shouldn't feel certain things? Have you been minimizing or denying what you're feeling or going through by saying you shouldn't feel that way because other people have it worse? Or maybe even telling yourself that you shouldn't feel that way because you lived through something worse. Honor what is true and real for you in this moment. When you are able to take a moment and honor that and feel some self-compassion, meaning no judgment about it, being able to say that it's okay that you feel that way, whatever it is. When you do that, you create space for that feeling to be acknowledged and validated. And when you do that, you create the opportunity for it to come up and dissipate. If you deny it, it doesn't go anywhere. It stays right there under the surface. You're telling it that it doesn't matter. You're telling it that it shouldn't feel that way, that it shouldn't be present, that it shouldn't exist. Now, that probably feels familiar too. So what you're doing in those moments is reinforcing everything that you experienced earlier in your life, and maybe even in your adult life. So you have to be able to honor it. And I recognize that can be a challenge, because sometimes it can be really hard, especially when we're in survival mode. It can be really hard to even recognize that there are feelings there. And that's why I'm saying, hit pause, take a moment and check in with yourself. Have you been feeling more stressed, more irritable, more flat, like kind of numb? Have you just been going through the motions? Have you been getting angry more easily? Have you maybe not been eating well or at all? Or maybe eating a lot of stuff that's not good for you, or eating a lot? Either one of those can be a sign that you are pushing aside what is present. If you are getting angry easily or shutting down, those are big signs that you are not connecting with what is very real and present within you. So, being able to recognize that there's something within to honor is really important. It is also really important to allow yourself to share that. It can be with somebody inside your home. It can be with a friend that you're chatting with. It can be with a therapist. But it's important to, part of the way that we honor is by expressing. It doesn't always have to be that way. It's just one of the ways that we can honor. So when you do connect with a friend, or when somebody asks, how are you doing? Before just automatically saying, I'm good, I'm okay. Maybe just check in for a moment. Take a breath before you automatically respond and say, it's been a hard day. Or I'm feeling the stress more today. Practice being honest with yourself and with others about how you're really feeling. Because if you just keep pushing it away, if you keep denying it, it doesn't go away. It just keeps building and building and building. And that's going to turn out one of two ways. You internalize it, and it has a significant impact on you, either in terms of depression or anxiety, or completely pulling back and isolating from everybody, which is a part of anxiety and or depression, and it feeds off of itself. Or it's going to get really big, and at some point you're not going to be able to push it away because it's going to be too powerful, and you are going to act it out. And that's not going to feel good to you, and it's not going to feel good to the people likely that you care about. Because you're likely not interacting with a lot of people that you don't care about. And at some point, it's going to express itself in a way that isn't going to feel good to you or to them. And we don't want that. We need connection right now. We need to be mindful of continually making an effort to connect to those within our own homes, but also to those outside of our homes. So take some time each day and check in with yourself. How am I really feeling? What have I struggled with today? What do I really need? What is my heart craving? What is my soul desiring right now? And then honor that. You may be craving or desiring something that isn't available to you right now. Don't take that to mean that you're not deserving or worthy of it. But maybe what you're wanting is to gather with a group of friends and play a game and laugh together. Honor that you're craving that. Honor that you're really missing that. And then be able to say to yourself, okay, I'm really going to look forward to when we can do that again. But in the meantime, what can I do to help fill that at least a little bit? And maybe that is reaching out to one of those friends that you might get together with and saying, I cannot wait to get together again. I'm really feeling like I missed that. That's not necessarily an easy thing to do. So being able to do that is honoring it. Even if you can't make it happen, you're honoring that it's present for you. If it is something that you can make happen, then try to make that happen. And I know it can feel vulnerable to reach out to somebody and say, I miss you. Or do you have time to get on a video chat? I know that can feel really vulnerable, but that other person might be craving it just as much as you are, but they're afraid too. So, try to make that commitment to yourself today and maybe every day going forward until we are able to get back to some sense of our more normal ways of interacting and taking care of ourselves. Let this maybe even be a practice of creating some new ways or some additional ways of honoring and connecting. Take a moment at the end of this video to just take a couple of breaths, maybe even putting your hands over your heart and asking yourself those questions. How am I feeling? What do I want? What do I need? And then go out. And when I say go out, I don't necessarily mean leave your home, but go and try to make those things available to yourself. Take care, be safe, honor yourself. We are in this together, and we will get through this together.